Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise before you here this evening, a stormy evening in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital, to make an address on behalf of my constituents in my district in Michigan's 11th district, representing and covering the bulk of Oakland County. And I make such an address this evening to reflect on the trajectory of our democracy, to reflect on events that have occurred since I booked this special hour address back in July, and also to make some pronouncements around reforms, revisions, and efforts to come together for the health of our union. And make no mistake about it, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely recognize the profound and humbling reality that it is to be a duly elected member of the House of Representatives, speaking and maintaining the privilege to speak in this chamber to anyone who seeks to be watching back at home, and on behalf of this profound nature of the discourse of our democracy. I booked this special hour because so much happens in the days of Congress, the session days of committee markups, of meetings with stakeholders and constituents, conversations with colleagues who hail from every zip code around this great nation. And something that I like to tell the people back at home is I have friends as such. You know, a woman from Oakland County, Michigan, a champion for advanced manufacturing, somehow now hails friends from Alaska to Tennessee to Maine to the coasts of California and inland into Nevada and the like. And the experiment of America and this experiment of American democracy really truly manifests in this very chamber. And of course we recognize that all too often it is not celebrated, it is not covered in the media outlets, from the national news to the print journalism to the ongoing nature of social media, when and how we come together on behalf of this nation. But something that we just witnessed is a failure to vote on passing our budget, and the clock is clearly ticking. The Democrats and Republicans couldn't come together. In fact, Republicans joined Democrats to tank Republican legislation to fund the government. And so we're again faced with the scenario that we've seen ourselves in time and time again in the 118th Congress, where the minority party comes forward to act to save the worst from happening. Proudly, President Biden, in the last year of his presidency, can now just about claim that the government hasn't shut down once under his watch. We have not defaulted on our debt. And of course, just last term in the Congress, we rescued this nation from the worst effects of a COVID-19 pandemic, investing in communities, investing in the incredible county I'm so privileged to represent, in Oakland County. We gave Oakland County $300 million, so we didn't have to go back to our taxpayers and ask for more. We are a donor-rich area. We all know that. We pay more than our fair share of taxpayer dollars, and then when we want to do more in the communities, we've got to go back and excise more tax. We've got to do millages. Well, what Oakland County, under the great leadership of Dave Coulter, someone who I am so proud to call a dear friend and a collaborator, and someone I work with very closely on behalf of the constituents of the 11th District, because we believe in the table setting of government. We believe that government works best when federal, state, local, municipal come together to utilize taxpayer dollars effectively. And so what Coulter and his team were able to do with the monies that came down from the Great American Rescue Act, the tie-breaking vote that Vice President Harris placed to pass it, is that they have invested in dozens of senior centers like the one in Waterford that was going back and time again for a millage and couldn't achieve that millage, and now they have their funding. Birmingham Next has their funding. Medical debt for the people of the 11th District and Oakland County wiped out. Monies to invest in 3D printing, a program designed by Automation Alley, which is now being replicated in several other counties and has received funding from the state. And so that is just one bill that was passed at the beginning of the 117th session of Congress when President Biden rightfully took his oath and was sworn in as the 46th President of the United States. But we didn't stop there, and we did become bipartisan when we passed an infrastructure bill. Who knew that infrastructure would become so partisan? But it was somewhat partisan for some who were adamantly against the bill, and now they go home and take the credit when the bridge and the road the bridge is being repaired and the road is being paved. But it's absolutely enormous that for once, instead of just authorizing, we appropriated money to say we're going to do the maintenance and repair, and we're going to put the contractors to work. We're going to make sure we've got prevailing wage and good wages and a seat at the table for our unions. I talk to my building trades. They tell me they're all very busy, that they couldn't be busier. Well, of course, then matched with this incredible infrastructure bill, which has done a lot for our water systems and our lead pipes and public transportation as well. Of course, Oakland County passed a major transportation millage as well. Here in the Motor City, we have now busing that works really well. It goes east to west. It was quite the triumph of last term. And what we also have noticed, though, here is that when we did the clean energy investments, when we looked global competition in the face and said, look, in the last administration, in a bipartisan way, we renegotiated NAFTA. We called it USMCA. We plussed up Buy American content. We said we're going to have the rules of the road for our auto industry to succeed, a platform for us to go into markets. And yes, this happened under President Trump and with Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We renegotiated USMCA. And then in the next term, we said we're going to make investments in clean energy, not subsidies, not ownership structures, but large capital-intensive investments in industries of scale. So what, my friends? So that we're not overly reliant on the adversaries on the global stage, the Chinese Communist Party for one. You know, gosh knows what's going to totally happen over there. But we want to have domestic technologies and innovations. We want to have an ownership structure so that we're not forced to go and buy from overseas markets. We have learned this lesson over and over and over again. We've learned this lesson with semiconductors, the microchips that go into anything from your general electronics devices, your cell phone, your computers, your music players, if you're still listening to those, to, of course, the automobile. And the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden we couldn't get the shipments in, and we were making all these beautiful cars, and we really do salute our auto workers for their great efforts during a very trying time, certainly protecting and maintaining their safety, but staying dedicated to the production and the production efforts of their enterprise, as well as our innovation ecosystem. So you see, Michigan did something enormous. We responded to the industrial call to action during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was, of course, our manufacturers, large and small, that were addressing the supply chain disruptions, from the personal protective equipment to the ventilators that we were running low of and all that. And then they continued to innovate. And here we stand at the precipice of this incredible new mobility moment that is being led by the auto industry. I think some want to say, oh my gosh, this is the government dictating the terms. And of course, you know, I just received an incredible briefing today from the MIT Sloan School of Business. They work across the aisle. They have this unbelievable data set that shows, what we need to do to stave off the 5-degree warming of the planet. And it's a whole host of things. But of course, to my capitalist-focused friends and my capitalist-focused countrymen and women, those are all profit-making endeavors. We are here, my friends, to talk about the future, and we should be celebrating it and not cowering and clinging to the past, and absolutely saluting and recognizing the freedom of our fellow countrymen and women who are going to buy the automobile they want to buy. But of course, we have 1 million new electric vehicles that were sold in the United States of America, 75,000 from GM, 75,000 roughly from Ford, and they're being honest and transparent about what they want to do. Every week I go and I visit a manufacturer, and I meet them where they're at, and I sit in their conference rooms and I walk their floors. I'm in my 6th year of doing this, and really tremendous things are happening all across Southeast Michigan with our automotive supply chain. They've been very dedicated to some of the transition that their customers, the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, are professing to make, that they want to be zero emissions, maybe in total. But we want to win the future, and we want to be innovators and technology leaders. And of course, with chips and the microchips running short during the global pandemic, of which I mentioned that Michigan really responded to in a tremendous way, we also, frankly, Mr. Speaker, learned a big lesson, which is that the United States, Gordon Moore and some brainiacs out west innovated the chip. They innovated the microchip. And we were at one time producing 40% of these chips in the United States of America. And it was our technology, it was our innovation. And then it wasn't just low labor costs, which is a reality, but it was kind of an investment structure. It was kind of a wooing that took place. And the chips start going over to Taiwan and China and all this and that. And then the tide really rolls out. And I can speak to this as someone who was serving as a presidential appointee in the administration of Barack Obama during the Great Recession, when we were doing a rescue, not just of Wall Street. It wasn't just a Wall Street rescue that started under President Bush, and look, these financiers and the capital markets and the derivatives trading that had gone awry. It's trading, by the way, derivatives trading that had gone awry. It was the foreclosure crisis that was tied to that. It was the Main Street effort of saying that we are not going to liquidate or see the liquidation of General Motors and Chrysler, and we use the troubled asset relief funds to invest in the companies and not to own them or control their day-to-day management. And of course, we're sitting in these ornate government rooms, and we were rightfully saying we've got 2 other big problems. One is on semiconductors. We're not making enough chips. We're too overly reliant on foreign markets. Well, that comes to roost in the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, every week, as a humble member of Congress from the southeastern Michigan, and as someone who evangelizes and champions our manufacturing economy, I decide to reach out to the Speaker of the House through the professional way in which we do so as members of Congress. Letter. I send the Speaker of House a letter a week almost. Let's do something on chips. And then, of course, the great Gina Raimondo, Commerce Secretary, partners up with the White House Office of Leg Affairs and some of us lawmakers. And we were, and oh my gosh, the Senate was involved, and I love to tell the Homeric story about passing bills. But the short of the long is we passed a CHIPS bill, chips and science. And it was a really ringing moment here in this body because, again, it was bipartisan. And of course, I'm sitting on the Science Committee as a chair of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, authorizing the doubling of scientific research for the National Science Foundation, all passed unanimous, all passed bipartisan. We passed chips and science, and we say with that, a tranche of money, which I understand that my friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are more keen to austerity measures and maybe didn't take the vote accordingly. Well, look, $52 billion we said we'd commit in the marketplace. And of course, we're poking and prodding at the Commerce Department, and they're working through some of the legal matters to get more of the money out. And we don't want it to be too cumbersome. But $52 billion signed into law, committed. It was an August day in 2022, hot as all get out. And my friends, it's absolutely incredible, because within one business quarter, $200 billion of private sector capital commitments were made here in the United States of America. That is a 21st century industrial policy approach. And so we're looking at this also because there was a number two. We had two problems: chips, which we've sought to solve, and Raimondo will tell us, Secretary Raimondo will tell us, that we have a plan to be the only country by 2030 who will design, produce, and ship these chips, that we will be the ones to do it. And I'm very excited to see where these investments are going. But we had a second problem that we had recognized a decade and a half ago, and that was around critical minerals. That we, again, are overly reliant on foreign markets, and particularly the Chinese Communist Party, on critical minerals. And the challenge here is that 98% of these minerals that go into your cell phone, that go into our manufactured goods, that are so absolutely tied, critical minerals, critical materials, so tied to our manufacturing enterprise, and a weakness, a supply chain weakness of the United States of America. And we are now starting to form a legislative agenda around how we could do similar to what we did with chips, although it's more complicated. And of course, I can see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, eyeing on some of the permitting challenges and some of the reforms that we want to do to accelerate this clean energy revolution. So you've got the environmentalists and the regulating insecure people coming together for once. But we want to do the same thing on critical minerals, right? We want to work with our allies. We want to pass trade deals. We know we're going to be renegotiating USMCA. The year 2025 is just around the corner. So many of us remember the energy, the enthusiasm, the almost revolutionary moment that it felt like to arrive in the 21st century. Everything was 21st century. Everything was the next 21st century plan and the agenda and all this. Well, now we're squarely in the 21st century. And we've got opportunities galore, and we've got some challenges that we want to address. And we want to bring together our allies, similar to how we did in other types of arrangements. The AUKUS arrangement that is now Australia, UK, US, allowed us to invest in nuclear submarine development and technology development. We've got the Quad initiative, and we really do salute and recognize the current administration's approaches to foreign policy as a way forward and a way to lead by bringing people along, and not saying that we're going to pay for everything, but bringing people along through the rules-based, open, free market, capitalist, democratic society principles. In April of this year, believe it or not, we passed a foreign aid package for democracy here in the chamber, and of course in the other chamber, the upper chamber, and it was signed into law by the president. Well, it was to a T the exact package he asked for in October. Support for our democratic allies, support for democracy, and obviously some efforts which have fallen off the rails this term around securing our own borders. And we can only hope to see the day in which such important things are not so political that they remain stalemated. I certainly seek to be a part of the bipartisan solutions to say that if you are trained in the United States of America, if you're getting that PhD, we want to find a way to keep that talent here. This is something that we heard over and over and over again from our stakeholders on the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Don't let the talent leave our shores. that's a way in which we innovate. And at the same time, too, let's truly invest in border security. I come from a northern border state, and we take really seriously our relationship with Canada and the security of both of our borders and trade, and certainly looking at the rail and the bridges, and we're working on building a new bridge. Well, it's almost built in southeast Michigan, a large export destination. It's economics, it's livelihoods, and it's also people's lives. It's what draws people together in many respects, the ability to connect. And that was something that was somewhat taken from us during the pandemic period. And we're not forgetting of it. And we certainly want to continue to support people to be the best and the most achieving that they can be. And that is all around us in Southeast Michigan. People innovating in their garages and creating new businesses and being entrepreneurial. We always want to support people to succeed in small businesses and listen to them. I always say, listen, if I can be of help, that's great. And if not, I'm happy to step and get out of the way. But of course, some other matters of bipartisan congressional coming together at this moment are worth reflecting on a new subject, and that is with regard to a role that I have had in this Congress since the year 2022 as the co-chair of the Task Force on American Hostages and Americans Wrongfully Detained Abroad. This is a task force that is bipartisan. It is co-chaired by my colleague from Arkansas, French Hill. It brings together members from all over the Congress to shine a light on these wrongful detentions, on these American hostage scenarios. And we have certainly had a term around hostages here in the chamber, and some really great work that has been done in addressing the hostage crisis, the hostage crises, and the ways in which we can operate most effectively as a legislative body. Now, I fell into this role on the request of a former congressman from Florida who now runs the American Jewish Committee. He's the president of the American Jewish Committee, former Congressman Ted Deutsch, a dear friend of mine. And he was the co-chair. And upon his retirement, he asked me to fill in his shoes. And in part is because I was showing up at all the task force meetings on behalf of Paul Whelan. Paul Whelan, resident of Novi, Michigan, employee of Borg Warner, a very large billion-dollar-plus American automotive supplier in which he was in charge of global security. And of course, it's quite memorable because just as I was preparing to be sworn in for my first term in the Congress representing Michigan's 11th district, right as the year 2019 was being rung in, we had gotten word that on December 28th, 2018, that Paul was taken captive by the KSB and the Russian Federation. They ultimately charged him on false grounds of total sham, of espionage, and it was 5 years, 7 months, and 5 days that Paul was unlawfully and illegally and unjustly imprisoned. Now, in this term of the 116th Congress, I had the privilege and the rightful duty, in coordination with Paul's incredible family, of writing a resolution, H.R. 552, calling on the Russian Federation to free Paul Whelan. Worked with my colleagues across the Michigan delegation. Mr. Tim Wahlberg was at the time representing Manchester, Michigan, and that is where Paul's family lives, and was in regular communication with them. And we were staring down the face of Putin, because it was Putin's game to take Paul Whelan, a former Marine, a hometown son of Michigan, and an attempt to disappear his life. An attempt to play games of politics and embarrassment to the United States, and of course with the ultimate goal of getting a swap. Now, H.R. 552 the resolution calling on the Russian Federation to free Paul Whelan, produce the evidence or free Paul Whelan. They had no evidence. There was nothing he had done wrong. He was a citizen on his own time, an American citizen on his own time, visiting Russia. That resolution was voted on unanimously. Unanimously. Everyone who voted that day, they voted yes. They voted to support the resolution, and the same thing happened in the Senate. And we had 3 terms, and we voted on the same resolution each time. And on August 1st, it was a Thursday, into actually almost the following day, it was nearing midnight by the time the plane landed, Paul Whelan returned home to American soil. The ultimate and largest hostage-freeing effort since really the Cold War took place. Paul Whelan, Anna, Evan Gershkovich, involving some of our other European counterparts. And of course, I was watching as the plane, the bright light in the sky, descending from the heavens, it felt like, landing at Andrews Air Force Base, greeted by President Biden, greeted by Vice President Harris, among the political events that were going on as well. But of course, the governing, as President Biden always reminds us, still goes on, and there's still so much work to do. Paul Whelan, the door opens, he appears, and he steps off the plane. He walks down the stairs. And the president placed the very American flag pin that he was wearing on Paul, and we know that Paul cherishes that and wears that pin often. And it was so momentous. It was so surreal. We had so many starts and stops and missed opportunities and trials and tribulations and lack of familiarity of what it was like to see an American. He was the first one out of the crew that was taken, be put into a prison, not wanting to at all prevent what needed to happen from happening. And that was such a cause for celebration in Michigan. Billboards, "Welcome Home Paul," with a yellow ribbon adorned on the billboard that people could see as they drove along our highways. And there's so much to share about this journey and the legislative body of work that surrounds hostage affairs and negotiations and the return of wrongfully detained Americans. 5.5 years. Paul lost his job. He lost his place of residence. His dog passed away. We've mentioned Flora on this House floor before. And now it's an effort to rebuild. And so many of us with this task force, and as we know, we're passing an NDAA soon, and as we know, we got the Robert Levinson bill passed in 2020, and a really phenomenal package of legislation that has passed, but more to do. And we remain dedicated to that effort. But of course, later that month, that very same month of August, just last month, another tragedy struck our hostage community. 6 hostages who were taken from Israel on October 7th, 2023, were murdered. Murdered by Hamas terrorists in a tunnel. Takes your breath away. Puts sand in your mouth. What's there to say beyond the overwhelming expression of condolences to the family and to the people, the families, and the people impacted by this? We don't even have the exact date. We have a sense of the exact date. The bodies were recovered on the 31st of August. Hirsch Goldberg Poland, whose name I know has been spoken in this chamber, and who has absolutely remarkable parents, John and Rachel. Rachel, who received a Time 100 designation, so Time 100 Person of the Year for her advocacy. Hirsch is American. Hirsch was born in America. Hirsch was born on U.S. soil, and he was taken by terrorists on October 7th, 2023, because he was at a concert celebrating peace, love, and freedom. Now, as someone who's been doing the task force work and working so closely with so many advocacy partners, over and over again, we kept expressing that the hostages in Gaza, the Americans, 32 Americans killed that day, 9 Americans taken, that they're the heartbeat of the negotiation. Hirsch wasn't the only person killed, murdered in August, 23 years old. Eden at 24, Ori at 25, Alex at 32, Carmel at 40, and Almog at 27. These are shots heard around the world, and they're attacks on all of our humanity. And they're a reminder to those of us who are stewards of democracy and freedom and the efforts of this chamber that we must do more, that we must continue to say the names, we must continue to push for a just ceasefire, an end to the war, which means that we're going to see a return of the hostages and Hamas surrendering, that these individuals should have never been murdered. Now, in August, we weren't in session. There was no way to verbally address this chamber. And so, as I had booked this special hour address before the last session had concluded, it weighed on me, recognizing that we had a pretty enormous month in terms of these affairs, and the work and the support alongside the Levinson family, alongside Paul Whelan and his family, the family of Hirsch, the remaining hostages in Gaza, who have suffered through torturous conditions, tunnels and starvation. One of the young women who was murdered, just 79 pounds. This is why we stand united around a foreign aid package for democracy here in the United States of America. And as we seek to continue to do the work on behalf of the people who sent us here, to continue to do the work on behalf of justice and fairness, and to remind ourselves that there are many who unfortunately do not share our view of freedom and who want to disrupt it, who want to override it. Is the target Israel or is the target America? You know, Israel's war now on so many different fronts. Pressures in the north, 80,000 people removed from their homes, and the like. I am proud to be a supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship. I am certainly not a voting member of that country, but I'm a supporting member of this body who recognizes the essential nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And what that means, not just for our national security, which in this moment is quite paramount, but also what that means for our trade, for economy, for innovation, and the like. And we continue to extend our support and our encouragement and our love to the people of Israel, the people suffering, the people who are scared because our siren's going to go and are you going to have to hide and are the children going to be able to go to school, the reality of what Hamas has done in Gaza, caring nothing with the nearly $1 trillion of assets for the people, the innocent people who live in Gaza, proclaiming that civilian deaths are a good thing. And of course, that is one element to what is going on now in the Middle East. So as I look towards the next 25 years in terms of the quarter 21st century to the mid 21st century, and what is going to be determinative of our outcomes, we certainly recognize that history, the brief history of this incredible nation of ours, is so incumbent upon us. It is heavy and it is incumbent upon us, in part because of a great world war that Michigan played a critical and essential role in the arsenal of democracy as we responded to the attacks on our country, the attacks on civil liberties, and playing a role in ending it, and then using our industrial might to change the world's economy yet again. And that yet 80 years, almost 80 years since the end of World War II. So a living memory it is barely. And it is a history worth teaching. It is a history worth knowing as an American. As part of the horrors of the Holocaust, we say, never forget. And we ask ourselves, what are our challenges for these next 25 years? I don't want to see it be the drumbeat of war. My responsibility here is not to shepherd America into war, but certainly it is recognizing that autocracy and democracy are competing, and there is an undergird of jihad taking place, and jihad that seeks to disrupt and to dismantle, to bring us back to an ancient time that we don't want to see arrive again, that terrorizes people. And the jihad is hitting in Russia, and it is a threat and a reality here in the United States of America and across Europe. And yet, as we look at ways in which our nation exemplifies its leadership on the global stage, with allies, with trade partners, and the like, we've got to seek ways in which we bring people along to succeed. It can't just be America on an island alone. We've got to advance and continue to push forward a foreign policy agenda that allows for and provides the conduit for our success, not just as a nation, but as the harbinger of freedom. And last century, we tried a lot of different ways to place freedom on people and to encourage democracy. In some ways it worked, in some countries it worked, in some countries it didn't. Exploited free markets on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party remains a problem. I, as a member of the Select Committee on Strategic Competition, as I've mentioned, we really seek to compromise and work in a bipartisan way because that sends a bigger message. And some of this also comes back now to another important topic, which is the reform of our democracy. Not in full, but as lawmakers, any time we're passing a law, we're making a contribution to our democracy. I, as a member of Congress from Michigan, introduces a bill, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's not just for my constituents, it's the nation's laws. We here this evening, couldn't pass a federal budget. We are passing the nation's budget. And so I find it worth our efforts as lawmakers and as stewards of the Constitution to ask ourselves of worthy improvements. You've seen this term, 7 bills introduced by colleagues on the other side of the aisle specific to the District of Columbia and its unique status, non-state status of seeking to govern ways in which the District of Columbia works. I don't know if those are messaging bills. Sometimes that's what they call them, messaging bills, or points that folks are trying to get across. It puzzles me. Why would you come here from Texas to legislate specifically to the District of Columbia? Now, I have participated in the majority in the debate to add the District of Columbia as a state to the Union. And this is not about politics. And of course, there's the Puerto Rico consideration, and that comes with its complexities and its own points about self-determination. But the people of Washington, D.C., over 700,000 people, larger than not a lot, but a handful of states, have said they want to become a state. Now, this is the grand conversation of the historic nature of the body we serve in. It's every debate that was had in the first 100 years of this chamber. How did states get added? Well, of course, it was controversial based on the horrors of slavery and something that this country had to shed itself of through civil war. And I'm not saying that's what is weighing down on District of Columbia, but we added states to this union. It was a constitution with 13 colonies. It was a constitution that was written over, periods of time. And we have these constitutional scholars, and we've got these points of history. And allow me to just share as an aside that it is really quite humbling to talk about the Constitution on the floor of this House. Debates that we can go back to that were written up, and points that were made, and doctrines that were written surrounding it, and of course, starting with the Declaration of Independence, and that's an origin story. Our Declaration of Independence is an origin story. So it's just like meeting someone for the first time. Where were you born? Who were your parents? What is your origin stories? Origin stories become not things of myth, but really cause for celebration. And we should be proud of America's origin story. I certainly am. I revel in celebrating July 4th safely and freely here in the United States of America every year, and I'm grateful for it. And it is not to be blasphemous to our Constitution. It is not to be disregarding of its strong governance and the ways in which our laws and our systems have moved us forward over and over again, much to the envy of many. A strong economy, strongest economy in the world, great innovation, great communities, great schools, good elections. But we've got to look this time in the face. In July of 2020, I didn't speak these words, but I wrote these words and I submitted them to the chamber. And I think that they are worth sharing in part, because we are in an election year, and I'm not politicking and I'm not abusing this lectern or my time or my space here. These elections seem to drive us further from each other than they do driving us together. It's like we can't see each other. I am from a politically popular state, Michigan. People are campaigning and competing for Michigan. So I see it all. I see what's going on with these national campaigns. And in July of 2020, July 9th of 2020, I submitted words to the congressional record. Madam Speaker, I rise today with respect to our democracy. We boast a steady history, no matter the circumstance, of maintaining a peaceful and efficient process upon the conclusion of our presidential elections. Whether a president continues in office for another term, experiences defeat, or concludes holding office due to the constitutional term limit, our democracy has flourished to the benefit of the American people for centuries. For centuries. Now, I am going to guess that we're going to have a passionate, heated November 5th. and a result is going to happen. And I'm going to make this extension similar to how I did in written form 4 years ago of committing to that peaceful process. And this is not to shame or to scold or to admonish. We are in a new time. We're not struggling with the pandemic. We're not struggling with people not being able to work and dealing with some other matters that kept them pent up. But we're here to flourish as the 21st century hits its quarter mark. And when I think about what happened, and I was here as the 2020 election happened, and then debates pursued and fights and claims of malfeasance, which were really never proven. But I stand here because from 2000 to 2020, we had a lot of frustrations with our federal elections. 2000 was one. It was major. Mr. Speaker, can you just tell me how much time I have left?
The gentlelady from Michigan has 15 minutes remaining.
15 minutes, a good 45 minutes of going strong here, and not a sip of water. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I will use my 15 minutes. And I'm going to say this because we had the 2000 election, which was really determined by the Supreme Court. And instead of, as people who are in the political process and people who surround the lawmaking of this nation, instead of saying, gosh, what are the American people telling us over and over again? We're closer together than we are further apart. You know, we got a 4-seat effort to have a new majority in the Congress. We have a 50-50 Senate. We have an electoral college, which was somewhat designed to placate now illegal and abhorrent, recognized as abhorrent matters in the United States of America. But we have an electoral college that has determined a handful of these elections, particularly in this century. We want to say your vote matters. Well, the popular vote is recognized, but it is not determinative. And we really haven't reformed or adjusted a thing. We've just continued on. We haven't made amendments. We haven't added states to the unions. We've just said this is the way it's going to be. And so we are experiencing a somewhat frustrating and tragic uptick in the disappointment of our fellow countrymen and women. They don't trust the system. And it astonishes me. This is the time in the process of elections where, of course, I'm in rigorous conversation with voters, but I'm also in rigorous conversation with people who aren't voting the way I am. And why is that? Why is that? Because I know that the world changes really quickly after an election, and we've got to find a way to keep going. We've got to find a way to make sure that this institution hits its pitch level of perfection. We'll never be perfect, but in terms of outcomes and results. And frankly, if you don't understand why people are voting a certain way, if you're just quick to write them off or to make a judgment or an insult, and maybe this is a lecture to everyone, but it's really just a point of personal privilege, you're not on the path to succeeding. And we know that. So I take pride as a liberal, as a Democrat who came in and won because people who voted for the 45th president voted for me. And I recognize that. I took that seriously. And I always kept it up. You know, we've had a couple of impeachments, well, last term and this term and the term before it. Every term I've been here, impeachment comes up. It's not clear to me that impeachment's even working for its intended purposes. Now, the last time we impeached a president, I thought, well, it's very impeachable because of the dereliction of duty and the total abandonment of the roles and the responsibilities of commander-in-chief. The government was being attacked. There's no excuse about it. Well, that impeachment failed. The impeachments are failing. We do have elections, and elections have to be fair. We can say that, but they have to be trusted. They have to be trusted. And when whether it's me or another elected official, just always deems someone as political, always deems them as political because they are falling in a party. Well, you're on that side and I'm on this side, and the trust can only extend so far. That becomes painful to our democracy. And while I haven't proposed every answer on every reform, de Tocqueville, certainly when he was evaluating our nation and exploring it and writing about it, he said, "Nothing is more wonderful than the art of being free, but nothing is harder to learn than how to use that freedom." The freedom of our fellow citizens, our fellow residents, and the freedom as lawmakers who've been bestowed a trust on behalf of the citizens of our district, the voting residents of our districts, to continue to help to form a more perfect union. We must reclaim trust. We must utilize every facet of this body, not in perfunctory terms, not for show, which is why I have carved out an hour of my evening to make this extension and to make this reflection and to dare to proclaim that a reformed and strengthened American democracy will best serve us to the future generations and those before us today. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.
The gentlelady yields back.